My name's Andrew Ellis, and I run a promotions company called Samizdat. And with the Biennial, I'll be producing Rhys Chatham's piece, A Crimson Grail for 100 guitars and 8 basses. And I've got the privilege of sitting here with Rhys, and we're going to ask him a few questions. So, Rhys, it's lovely to see you. And the first question I have for you today is your music's often described as being within the canon of minimalism and avant-garde. Do you have a preferred term for how your music's described?
I think that the reason that people refer to me as a minimalist is because of my background. In the early 70s, I worked in a group of a composer named Lamont Young. He had a group called the Theater of Eternal Music. In the United States, Lamont is, along with Terry Riley and Phillip Glass and Steve Reich and Charlene Palestine, are considered the founders of minimalism, the way Gavin Bryars and Michael Nyman would perhaps be considered to be that in the UK. So I worked in Lamont's group. I sang with him and his wife, Marion Zazila. Terry Riley would sit in with us from time to time. The trumpet player, John Hassel, was in the group. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I actually studied with Lamont. In return for lessons from him, I tuned his piano in something called just intonation. He has a piece called the Well-Tuned Piano. Just intonation is a tuning system that's based, it was actually invented by the mythic pre-Socratic philosopher Pythagoras, and everything is based on one sound and the overtones that come out of that sound. The music of Lamont and Terry Riley tended, and even Philip Glass and Steve Reich, tended to be extended time music, and it was called minimalism. So it's just a convenient handle to give people an idea of what the music is.
Looking kind of at your background again, I remember the last time you were here, you told me a story about when your friends bought tickets for a Terry Riley performance, and you kind of begrudgingly went and didn't know what to expect, but it became so important to you. Would you be able to regale that?
Actually, it was at this one. It was in 1968. It was at a wonderful place in Manhattan called the Electric Circus, and this was a place where everything, the lights were electronic. Before this was common in discos, and there was electronic music there, and there was a wonderful Monday night series of contemporary music, and I saw an advertisement for a concert by Terry Riley, and I'd seen a score of Terry's that looked not unlike John Cage's Variation 5, and so I thought, okay, it's going to be really noisy and probably really, really dissonant, which was in vogue back then. And so I went to the concert, and I heard this very, very tonal music, which was definitely not in vogue in the genre of contemporary music. So I asked for my money back. And I went downstairs, and it was $5. I was a 17-year-old kid. So $5 was a lot of money. And they wouldn't give it to me. So I said, so I'll go back. And then he was playing, this long-haired guy with red hair playing what sounded like a circus organ. I was completely disgusted. But then I gave it a chance. And then I said, this isn't so bad. And by the end of the concert, I converted to minimalism. And that's how it all started for me.
And that was prior to your time at the kitchen?
Yeah, this was before the kitchen.
And it kind of led into the kitchen. Would you be able to tell us a bit about your time at the kitchen?
Oh, sure.
And perhaps explain a little bit about what the space was like.
I had been working at New York University at the electronic music studio there. There was a composer who was a director named Morton Subotnick, who I was studying with. And I was at a dance concert and met these two wonderful video artists named Woody and Stan of the Sokol, and they were very interested in electronic music, so I showed them the studio, gave them some lessons on the Buchla synthesizer, which was the other main synthesizer after the Moog was invented. And they said, you know, we're starting this place called The Kitchen, and we'd really love to have some music there. Why don't you do a music series? So I based the music series at The Kitchen, this was in 1971, on the series that was happening at the Electric Circus. At first I invited all my friends from NYU, my composer friends, to play there. But pretty soon we had a concert going there every week. And the context was the area of Manhattan called Soho. And at that time, it was an area consisting of lofts of perhaps 1,200 square feet, 2,000 square feet, that were formerly sweatshops. But artists started moving into them because the rents were cheap. And so within a 20-block radius, you had a humongous number of visual artists like Richard Serra, composers like Phillip Glass and Steve Reich, choreographers like Yvonne Rainer, all working in this 20-block radius. And The Kitchen was right in the middle of it. And we thought, Philip at the time was, Phillip Glass was performing his pieces in lofts informally. Then we'd all go to his concerts as he was developing music and changing parts and music in 12 parts. And we thought we had a sound system. We had a beautiful Steinway B piano, and we thought we could put it on better. And the series worked out quite well.
That's wonderful. So the basis of kind of your large-scale guitar works are obviously informed by your past at The Kitchen and your time with Lamont Young and other minimalists, but there's also a history of your interest in punk rock bands and the whole no-wave scene that also inform your work. Would you be able to perhaps give us an insight into that whole no-wave universe?
Well, in the early 70s, I was a hardcore minimalist, doing pieces that were essentially one sound and listening to the overtone series over that sound that could go on for hours, or sometimes starting at 8 and ending at sunrise, listening to this beautiful one sound. But then round about 1975, 1976, I was very interested to see this person that I knew on the poetry scene at St. Mark's who did really very vigorous, exciting poetry readings, named Patti Smith. And all of a sudden she was playing at this place called CBGB's.
Did that open around that time? Was
Yeah,
that 75?
it was in the middle of 70s. Yeah. And so I was walking with a friend down the street near the Bowery in Manhattan, and he said, "Rhys, have you ever in your life been to a rock concert?" And in fact, I hadn't. My main interest was contemporary music and minimalist music when I was in conservatory, and of course I listened to rock, but I'd never been to an actual rock concert. So my friend, who was a composer, Peter Gordon, said, "Rhys, come on down to CBGB's. I think you'll like it. There's a really good band playing." And this was May of 1976, and the name of the group was the Ramones. And they had just put out their album by the same title, the Ramones. And what I saw changed my life, in brief. These four guys, tall, skinny guys playing electric guitars. Their music was more complex than the music that I did. I was playing one chord, they were playing three chords. But I felt something in common with what they were doing. And to make a long story short, the next day, a friend of mine had a Fender Telecaster that he wasn't using. He showed me how to play bar chords and a basic blues skill. And after practicing really, really hard every day and having very, very sore fingers from playing these bar chords and scales, in 6 weeks I was ready to play in a band.
It's wonderful. Is there a particular inspiration for A Crimson Grail? Is there a vision behind it? Is there one particular pinpoint that you can draw everything from?
I should back up before I answer that question, if I may.
Of course.
So after I saw the Ramones,
Yes.
I played in a no-wave band called Arsenal because I didn't want to be a contemporary music composer that was appropriating rock and roll. I wanted to do the field work, if you will. And also, I can't emphasize how exciting that scene was back then. Before, I would listen to groups like the Heartbreakers and think that I could never play guitar like that. But then people like Patti Smith and Richard Hell was such an inspiration to all of us at that time, because we thought, if Patti and Richard can do it, maybe we can do it too. And all kinds of interesting music came out of that. People like Arto Lindsay with DNA had never played guitar before and just got up there and played noise that was very musical, that was from his heart. So we had groups like Lydia Lunch's Teenage Jesus and the Jerks, and James Chance was playing in it. And this is the context where I developed a piece called Guitar Trio, which was minimalist in the sense that it was one note, it was the low E gradually adding the other notes of the electric guitar, turning into a kind of an E minor chord. But all the music and all the poetry of the music was in the harmonics. And we first played this piece at Max's Kansas City, which was a place where if they liked you, they would throw beer cans at you. And that was if they liked you. And if they thought you were, quote unquote, posing, you were in serious trouble. So I was worried, this is going to be too arty. But we played the piece, and people were coming back to the sound person and saying, "Where are you hiding the singers? We hear singers." And that's when I knew it was going to be okay. Because they were hearing the harmonics, of course, but still there was a drummer, and there was this very, very strong gesture, I would say, of rock and roll in it. And so it worked, and things started like that. And gradually over the years, I started adding more guitars. In the 80s, we had a piece called Die Donnergötter, which we performed at the Blue Coat here in Liverpool, thanks to you, last year, for 6 electric guitars, bass, and drums. And then in the late 80s, we upped the number to 100 with a piece called An Angel Moves Too Fast to See. In this piece, it's still a very strong rock and roll gesture. We had Jonathan Cain playing drums, who was the original drummer of Swans, with Mike Gerard. And so it was very powerful in terms of the rock element. With A Crimson Grail, I couldn't do that. I would have loved to have a full drum kit in A Crimson Grail, but when we first did it, it was done at the Basilique of Sacré-Cœur, which is as big as a cathedral, and the delay time was 15 seconds. So if you had a snare drum, a hit of the snare drum, you'd hear it for 15 seconds. So there was no question we couldn't have drums in this piece. So the piece was site-specific in the sense of that I designed it so it would work in a space with a long reverberation time. But in terms of your original question, where did it come from? Where did the idea come from? Part of it came from being site-specific, from being a piece made especially for a cathedral. But the idea of the piece actually came from a poem by Lord Tennyson called The Holy Grail. I think it was in Idylls of a King. And there was a line in it that struck me in particular that was talking about a crimson grail. And so I decided to call the piece that.
That's wonderful. I think it was Time magazine who described the piece as music to pray to.
In fact, during the negotiation to play to bring 100 guitars to Sacré-Cœur, I had to talk with the Monsignor there. And with some religious people, you know, like with the Dalai Lama, they're all smiles, and so they're Catholic people like that too. And then there are the other kind of religious people that are very serious. And this Monsignor was a very serious kind. And he asked for a little example of the music, and I gave him the softest thing with 100 guitars that I could come up with. And he was going, oh, it's too loud. But finally we made a deal. We'd play music for a half an hour, and then we'd pray for a half an hour. And we did that all night because that was the context. And that might have been where the time code came from.
Do you think you would, if the correct space and the right space came up for you, you would even increase the guitarist numbers further? Is it, if you found the right space, you'd be able to go up to 1,000 guitars? Would that be something you'd be interested in?
We did the piece originally. The idea of the piece is to surround the audience with guitars in a U shape and take the sound and send it around the room in an antiphonal kind of way. So a sound might start in one part of the cathedral, and then it will go on a 180-degree angle to another part, and playing around with the stereo or quad kind of effect. So the number we need is however many guitars it takes to make this U shape. In Paris, I thought I was going to need 400. Because school was just beginning, only 126 showed up. But it turned out to be more than enough, and I realized I didn't need 400. And so it's not a question of just massive numbers of cars. It's just how many guitarists does it take to to surround the audience,
space to make it work within the space.
Yeah, and in the case of Liverpool, we've not thought that 100
I think
would be fine.
I'm really excited to hear
Plus
the sound
8
in the
plus
space.
bass.
Yeah. So this will be your third time in Liverpool. So Crimson Grail on Friday, Die Donnergotte last year, and then I think you found a piece of the Everyman in the 80s.
Oh, that would have been with the dance company of Carol Armitage, and we did drastic classicism for that performance. Oh, that's going back. It's taking me down memory's lane.
I heard an interesting story about that. I think the promoter told a good friend of mine about this. At the current time, the Everyman Theatre had a women's hospital next to it.
Maternity hospital.
A maternity hospital.
Oh,
Would you like to?
I was afraid you were going to bring this up. At the time, I was very much, I transformed from being a contemporary music composer to a complete punk rocker and all that implied. And when they told us that there was a maternity hospital next door, and could we please turn the volume down, I didn't have a good reaction.
Yeah.
And this was because at that time I hadn't had a kid yet and didn't know what the experience was, and I think I might have been 26, and I wasn't sympathetic at all. So I think what we ended up doing was we turned the volume up, and it was a very invigorating performance. But all the press wrote about the day after was how we wouldn't turn the volume down for the maternity hospital. It was a bit embarrassing. So if you see this friend, give him, I have a daughter now, and I was present at the birth, and if I had heard those guitars playing, I wouldn't have been happy either. And so do give him my apologies.
Well, I heard you may have helped with the birthing process, made it a bit easier for the women.
Did it? Oh,
so maybe we need to get you into a maternity hospital next time we do Crimson Grail. We'll see what happens.
We can work on it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rhys. It's been wonderful to talk to you as always.
And it's great coming back here again. And so thank you also.
No problem at all. I'd personally like to thank the Biennial, Liverpool Cathedral, the Dario Strings, and Liverpool Hope University for all their help in bringing this, and Arts Council, of course, for bringing this performance together. And thank you, Rhys.
Why would you thank Dario Strings?
because they gave us a shitload of strings.